Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. I'm here at DICE and have just recorded a wonderful conversation with Philip Eriksson, who was the lead sound designer on Hazelight's It Takes Two. We talked all about his background that led him into the world of sound design in general, and particularly for games, working at DICE and then of culminating at Hazelight, and the absolutely Herculean task of launching that game and the detail and just absolute planning mania that went into pulling it off. And I also got to walk away with some Finnish metal band recommendations, so enjoy.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Do you prefer Phil or Philip? I've already heard both.
I prefer Philip.
Philip.
Actually, yeah, lots of Americans call me Phil, but
P-Dog.
I've never been much into nicknames, but for some reason.
So you prefer like Mr. Philip Eriksson, like very formal?
Mr. Philip Eriksson, yeah.
Yes, all right.
But for some reason, nicknames keep popping up for me. But it's all good.
Has there been one that is particularly unacceptable?
Yeah, I think so. I think they are in Swedish though, so they wouldn't make sense on this
fly
podcast.
Right by
But for sure, there has been some.
Well, so that's curious. But you say it's an American tendency, but the unacceptable nickname is in Swedish.
That's true. But
finding holes in your story.
Yeah, you see the loopholes for sure.
Well, it's really nice to meet you. This is a rare. Almost none of these have I dove in, having never met my cohort here.
Yeah.
So this will be fun. So forgive me also if I ask very entry level questions about you, because this is all new to me.
Yeah, just shoot.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I guess we can kick off by saying we're in person. We're talking at the same table right now, which is the first time that this has happened with this podcast or any podcast in my life. In 2 years. It's very exciting. I feel like that's worth celebrating. We're at DICE in Las Vegas. And on top of that, you and It Takes Two is nominated in the audio category.
Yeah.
Congrats on that. That's very exciting.
So much. It is huge for us. Absolutely huge.
Just give me the quick rundown on your background in getting into sound design, presumably. Yeah. Just kind of, I always like to give a basic primer on just where people got started, what brought this thing onto their radar, the incredible diversity of stories with which people find their way into these super esoteric things that we do. It's not something usually someone kind of bursts out of the womb going, I want to sound design for interactive media.
No.
And so how did you get from the beginnings?
So I have a little bit of a fun story. So my dad, he had a lot of vinyls when I was young, like I'm talking 5 years old or something like that. So he played Van Halen Eruption, and I was standing in my underwear in the sofa playing air guitar to that solo. And it was just like, it just had so much energy, this sound. And I wouldn't almost call it music, because it's just like, it's an experience, it's a force. So I usually say that was where it started, because I wanted to play guitar after that, played with a lot of bands. I've been playing drums, singing, playing metal music and so on. So that was basically where it started.
In Sweden?
No, in Finland, because I'm from Finland, but I've lived in Sweden for about 10 years.
Okay, got it.
So that was where it all started.
What is the metal scene like in Finland?
In Finland, it's huge, actually. I think, don't quote me on this, but
it's not
I
like we're recording.
Exactly. But I think the biggest export music in Finland is actually metal music. Still to this day.
I know that Finnish metal bands is like a thing that, but I've never actually had occasion to sort of do a deep dive into the depths of that. But
there is a lot of depth in it.
Is there anything that you would chalk that up to? Is there what would make it particularly kind of take hold versus literally any other? Like, there's not, I would assume, by comparison, some robust Finland jazz scene by comparison, at least.
No.
So what is it about metal that
So
strikes
I would
the nerve?
say there is a lot of like this type of melodic, classically inspired metal music, and I think this is more of my guess at least. But in Finland we have this really famous music school called the Sibelius Academy, where most of the really talented musicians go to learn more. So that has definitely influenced like a lot of Finnish music, so there is, for example, like Nightwish that has incorporated some kind of like opera singing into their metal music and so on. So I would say that influence, at least from the classical music, is one of the key things actually for me.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there's a tangent that I will be Googling later and trying to learn more about.
Yeah, for sure.
As it's one of those things I definitely have heard reference to before in this kind of just in conversation. But so Van Halen set you on a path. You're already surrounded by the deep well of Finnish metal.
Yeah.
So it seems like the chess pieces are starting to line up here.
Yeah.
But then keep me going through the story.
Yeah, so what we did was with my band at the time, we recorded a few, just like singles or smaller albums.
How old are you, a teenager or something?
Yeah, like 15 years old or something like that, so very, very early. But the person who recorded these things, he showed me a little bit of Pro Tools and whatnot, and I was really inspired by that and just felt like, this is something that I want to, because I've always liked that, creative stuff mixed with some technology.
Right.
So what I did after I was like 16, I moved to Finland to study at a school to become a sound engineer. So I was there for 2 years, and I had a fantastic teacher who basically gave me like the foundation for any sound work, I would say. And I've had that in my backpack ever since, and not had to think about acoustics or just like basic fundamental sound engineering. It's always been there with me, and I'm super grateful for that I got that technical, like pretty basic but still technical background.
Was that aimed towards engineering music? Like, was that sort of the focus of that? How to be your own engineer for your bands or record other bands, or was it more like to produce bands? Or
not producing, no. It was more live sound and studio recordings. So that was what I did after that. I worked at a Finnish music studio for a little bit, recording some bands, and then from there I basically started my career as a live sound engineer. So I worked on different festivals, and
but you must have still been like a kid, basically.
Yeah. I started really early.
Is that were you abnormal, or are you sort of glossing past and being humble about sort of how precocious that is, or is the whole Finnish recording in a recording engineer industry a bunch of 18-year-olds, and that's just sort of normal life there?
No, I would say that I was a little bit special. Like, it wasn't always easy to be the young guy either, in that business. But I managed, and I really loved it. And I had a lot of older mentors and so on that taught me a lot of stuff along the way, which I'm super grateful for.
So you were obviously extremely convinced that this was your path.
Yeah.
Was there any moment where that... I ask because this is really... I feel very resonant with this story. I was the same. I was a young kid, and I just knew I wanted to be a composer. And for some people, they thought, oh, wow, that's so cool. How lucky to know what you want to do. And then there were other people that would see me as sort of naive and be like, the moment you get out into the world, you're going to find something else, and that you're just excited about this today or whatever.
Yeah.
And the naysayers, as it were, weren't. That's not a wild thought to have.
No.
But was there a moment for you that you felt like, all the other options are now irrelevant? This is like a lightning bolt, or was it just everything was kind of adding layers of paint, and until finally it was just so thick you couldn't deny it?
So I would say to the first part of the question, I considered actually becoming a construction worker.
It's basically the same thing.
Yeah, basically the same thing.
You use Pro Tools and...
Yeah, exactly. I tried that for like a summer job. It was really nice, actually. I liked it a lot, but I felt like, this is nothing that I can do my whole life. I felt like I was craving to be creative in some sort of way. Not to say that...
Is your family creative? Like you said your dad had the vinyl collection, but what they do?
I would say that they are creative, but not professionally, at least. My mom is a teacher. My father is a salesman, so not very creative, jobs there. But still, I would say that they have some creative, spirit in them. My father is really good at drawing and so on, and my mom played guitar when I was young, so she definitely influenced me in some sort of way. But
that also meant that they were probably not hesitant to support your interests in these ways. Like some parents kind of get suspicious of it because it feels like their kid is going to go face hardship essentially, and they, coming from a place of empathy, they're like, maybe find something a little bit more reliable. But it sounds like your parents were probably pretty on board with all this.
I would say, though, that they probably thought I was a little bit naive as well. Like, my relatives as well, my grandfather, he was like, is this really the right way to go? But after I did that course in Finland over those 2 years, and they saw that, like, I got a job, I went on doing like live sound and so on. I think they got more and more convinced as well that I had chosen the right path.
Well, hopefully this nomination here has finally...
nowadays they are like, but it was so good that we supported you throughout all of this, of course.
We're really pretty much responsible for his path.
Exactly.
That's too funny. Well, so I derailed you. You were starting to say you did this construction work. And then I was asking kind of if there was like a defining moment.
Yeah. So I would say that because it was after that summer job that I went to Finland to this course, and that I would say was the defining moment that, like, I needed to work with sound. And then, of course, my career has taken like some different paths along the way after that, because I stopped working with live sound, or I don't do that anymore. But I ventured into, I got into Stockholm Academy of the Arts. And I studied film sound design, so that was basically the next step. I wanted to go into something that was a little bit more, like I was really, really interested always in like sound effects, like, Transformers and so on.
Be the next
like,
Ben Burt.
Yeah, exactly. So that was something that was thrilling, but I had never made a film before I applied for that school. But I learned a lot at that school. Like it was super practical, so we basically had like project after project just making films. And I would say that one of the biggest things for me was that I basically had a studio room with the tools that I needed to work on my own project as well. So I did a lot of trailers and whatnot whilst being there. I'm not sure if it was okay that I did that, but I basically worked from like 9 o'clock until 11 in the night every day for 3 years, and I learned a lot of stuff along those, or during those hours and days and nights.
Very much a recurring theme already with you, just like attacking these things like a sort of starving animal, and just absolutely going for it.
Yeah.
But I always like, especially just knowing that there's some contingent of the listenership of this that are folks kind of early in their career who are trying to figure things out and take stock of their options and that sort of thing. I always like to ask these questions because everybody has such different paths, but it really does seem to be a bit of a thread that, the people, especially, people that come from like it's such a kind of UK and US centric industry in so many ways. Obviously Japan being probably, the other sort of major central hub, so that anybody who's coming from outside of those places, the stories that, like you're saying, that where they're coming from literally anywhere else, they always seem to have in common this just absolute drive to find their way in. And because it's not, I wouldn't call it necessarily a positive thing that these hubs kind of act like a force of gravity, but it seems to be getting easier to work from anywhere.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just a little observation there. But okay, so film, sound design, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I graduated that school, and like I worked on a few films, not for a very long time actually, because during the university studies, I did my internship at DICE in Stockholm, so EA DICE.
Different DICE than our current
exactly,
DICE.
Exactly. So I got to work.
Were you gamer in the background of this? Like, was this one of those where games? It wasn't like a huge leap in terms of just conceptualizing it?
No, I wouldn't say that it was, but I'm not the biggest gamer, or I wasn't at least, but I was really, really interested in like there I got that mixture of like creativity and technology. And also I would say that the film industry in Sweden wasn't that attractive to me, because the films that are made there, they don't really give that opportunity for like, just bold, big sound design. But the gaming industry did. So
especially a place like DICE.
Exactly.
I mean, since you mentioned like Transformers, which is obviously those movies in particular are always so interesting because they would come out, make unbelievable boatloads of money, and then when all the very kind of prestigious awards would come out, like the Oscars above all, the only thing they would ever get any acknowledgement for is visual effects and sound design, basically, and sound mix. But holy hell, deservedly so. I mean, it's such iconic and complicated mixes where you just think, a dub on one reel of a movie like that must take weeks just to sift through the 50 million layers. And
exactly.
So DICE is not far off from that with the kind of stuff that they do.
No, and like I remember one of my first assignments when I came to DICE was to create this destruction sound for like a huge bridge that just fell apart, and there was explosions.
Was this on like a Battlefield?
Yeah, it was a Battlefield Hardline that was co-developed with Visceral and DICE. I basically got like right into it. It was super nice for me because I could get like practical and just like create sounds instantly. And it was so much fun.
And what about the interactive component to it? Because that's always, especially when I talk to composers, that's always kind of the, the sort of the thing that separates people into groups. Because some really like to think in terms of music in a traditionally linear way, and then others, the interactivity. Like I had a conversation on this show with Olivier de Rivière, who did like the new Dying Light that came out just now, for example, and A Plague Tale and a bunch of other games. He's a French composer, and he's more than just about anybody else, single-mindedly obsessed with interactive music design. But a lot of composers really, even still, it's kind of this dark art.
For sure.
So to what extent? Because it's just so interwoven with the work that you would have at that point been just kind of getting exposed to. Like, to me, it seems like that's the big screaming neon sign, like the Excalibur, or Luxor or whatever, beam into the light, into the sky, of combining creative and technical. I mean, it's like the apex of that for basically all of human art creating. I mean, it'd be hard to name something that merges those more aggressively.
Yeah, definitely.
Did it jump out in that same way to you immediately? Was it kind of like, I've been hunting for this is the thing?
Yeah, I feel like for me it was, especially with the DICE games, I think they had such a cool mindset of like, worldizing stuff. So like basically making it believable and resonating through the world and so on, like making it interactive in that sense, like really believable and immersive. And that was something that was really tickling me actually. So I feel like, there are like games that sound more gamey. There are games that, like Battlefield, I wouldn't call it a simulator, but what we tried to do with the sound was really to like, make it smell, make you feel those like
it's
rock
like
debris.
hyper real. It's more real than real in a sense.
Exactly.
I guess I've never thought of it that way, but the way you just now said it, it's like it gives you the other senses. Sound kind of tricks you into thinking you're smelling and feeling heat and all these other things because it's just so tactile and and kinetic.
You really feel it. You just don't hear it. Like there is another dimension to it as well that we could deliver on.
But this was, you said it started as an internship, but you were there for a while, or?
Yeah, so I got hired after my internship, and I spent about 5 years, if you count my internship as well, at DICE. So I worked on 3 Battlefield titles, Battlefield Hardline, Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5, and then also Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I guess speaking of Ben Burtt, then to be able to go directly into Star Wars itself, man, I remember I was so excited for Battlefront. I was one of those guys that back in the day I'd played games like Tribes and these other kind of online drop into or even like Counter-Strike and games that have a similar general concept. And the original Battlefield 1942. I remember playing the hell out of that when it first came. It was like 20 years ago. and I was so excited. I remember seeing the depth of detail in Battlefront was so incredible. And as a lifelong Star Wars nerd, it was like, wow, this is probably the closest that anyone's made to just literally going in. And then 5 minutes later, it was like, all I could think about was a bunch of teenagers are kicking my ass so effortlessly right now that it was one of those like rage quit, like, to hell with this. This is like, I've never felt so old all of a sudden in my life.
Yeah, I don't know.
Made such a mistake getting that game on PlayStation because I'm so useless as a shooter with a controller. I need a keyboard and mouse. And I was all in too. I paid like $90 for the season pass and all the rest. And I played the game for like an hour. But I had complete and total admiration for it from an art and craft and a kind of technical execution.
Definitely super
blew
cool.
my mind.
Yeah.
So that's obviously going to be a massively formative few years working at some of the absolute most kind of premier, especially through the lens of sound design. Like those are really big, noteworthy, high profile projects in general, but through this lens especially, like even more than other, like if you're a voice actor in a game like that, it's different than if you're a voice actor in a Naughty Dog game or whatever, where that's like front and center in the experience. Yeah. But sound is basically that for a game like this.
Yeah, I would say so too. Yeah, it's the main actor.
How big of a team would it take to get like a Battlefront off the line? I mean, how many of you are contributing by the end?
We were a lot of people actually. Can't remember the exact amount, but I wouldn't care to guess actually. But we did collaborate with Motive and Criterion on the Star Wars Battlefront 2 title. So we were like, sound teams from different studios within EA, just working together to get this project out the door. Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
So then how do we get to present day from there? How long ago did that 5 years end?
Yeah, so that was about 3 years ago. So after Battlefield 5, I just felt like I needed something new, and I had... I had a few friends working at Hazelight and heard a little bit about what they were doing. A Way Out was coming out. I got to play that one. And I was super impressed with what they were doing. And they kind of had something that I was not missing at DICE, but that I maybe wanted to dive a little bit deeper in, and that was the storytelling. And like getting, maybe some of my film background and the knowledge that I received from school, and try to take that into the interactive environment and apply that to our games.
Is there a game that you would say represented kind of the peak version of, like, was there any game that you were playing around the time that you thought, that if I could work on a game like that?
Yeah, I mean, like Naughty Dog, like Last of Us, of course, like one of the best things. Yeah, both the first one and the second one, of course. I think that just that storytelling and like being able to actually give the players emotion and do that through sound and music and VO, that was something that tickled me. And I felt like Joseph have been just like, on the cutting edge of doing that with his earlier games before I joined. So I really felt like that was a super interesting future sort of step for me.
So it wasn't that you were sitting at home watching the Game Awards and you were like, that guy, I want to work with that guy.
Nah. Although I think he's super fun to work with, so definitely I like his
funny
spirit.
thing is, as kind of wild as a moment as that was, to me, he always just came across as somebody that was extremely excited and passionate. And everyone I've talked to that has worked with him or has always, I've only heard good things. And It Takes Two was great. I haven't finished the game, but my girlfriend and I love playing it. And I was like, this is significantly better than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, yeah?
And I didn't have low expectations, but it constantly kept from across every dimension where I thought, wow, the writing is better than most sort of very gamey co-op kind of games like that are not necessarily a game you look to for writing, and this one really was. It was actually really well put together and with oddly earnest heart and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I would say so.
And it just translated across every aspect. And okay, so does that mean that was this what they were basically starting on, and you were able to get in from the beginning?
Yeah, so it wasn't the beginning. I actually started. They had some stuff already. So when I joined, it was a pretty exciting time actually, because there was at least parts of the game that I could even play and so on, and also parts of the story. So
does that mean that there was were they hiring for sound and it was just missing, or what? Because that usually there wouldn't be playable chunks, it was just silent prototypes, or what?
Yeah, it was silence, complete silence. So they wanted to build up a team basically, so they hired me as the lead sound designer, and so my first task was basically to create this sound team. I had one other colleague that had been there for the past games that they did, A Way Out and Brothers as well, Gustav Grefberg. But he took on more of a composer role for It Takes Two. So went from the sound person, you could say, to a composer.
Yeah, I see. I don't think I realized that he was in-house, staff position.
Yeah, he is.
Wow, that's cool. That also turned out really well. So, all right, just start unpacking, how do you even, just take apart a thing like this, and how much of it was dictated to you in terms of, okay, I really want it to be like this, 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 and this. Was it here's, all right, it's a boss fight against a rusty tool, box or whatever. Yeah. See where that takes you. What's the kind of dynamic in terms of how kind of particular versus open-ended and all that kind of thing?
So I would say that for us in the audio team, it was very open. I think that one of the first things that we did actually at Hazelight and for It Takes Two was that we took a really small part of a level and had basically a vertical slice, you could say. We delivered all the sound effects and also a bit of music for it. And we played that for Joseph. And he basically, I would say, flew off the chair. And since then, it's just been he knows that we always try to make his games and our games sound as good as they can possibly be. So it felt like, we had basically creative freedom. There were a few instances where it was maybe we could do a little bit of this, maybe we could do a little bit of that. But I think, it's been fantastic to get that trust from the entire studio, basically, that they know what we're doing and they know that we are extremely serious and want to deliver. So we basically started making sound for this and found our own identity and the game's identity, of course, and did that completely by ourselves.
That's amazing. I mean, you obviously had to sort of earn it, and then but I love that once you sort of showed that you had a vision for it, that you could find it, you could execute on it, that the response was, okay, have fun.
And I think also we were probably, a little bit lucky or whatever you would call it, but that I think that what Joseph and the rest of the studio had in mind and, had envisioned in some sort of way, that was also what we wanted to create. So it just synced up, and then that trust was basically earned.
Yeah. Were there any sort of revelations? Sometimes you'll be working on a thing and there's just kind of that moment where it's the key in the lock just clicks and you realize, oh, that's what this is. This I've had it so many times. We're working on a project trying to figure out what's the musical identity, where I need somebody, either it comes from me or it comes from the creative director. Somebody says, they say the right thing, and it can be something very abstract. Something they'll just go, oh, how coffee tastes when it's old and cold, or they'll say something like that. And something about that reorients all my thinking. And now it's everything I write is relative to that. And hopefully I'm not being too kind of abstract and vague here, but this is a game that feels like there was an opportunity to find an identity that's not just, okay, what would it sound like for these characters, in a kind of blown up, sort of quasi-surreal, but very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of world. There's the realistic approach to that, but then there's also, it didn't strike me as you guys were aspiring to what would it actually be like. It felt more fantastical, but Am I wrong, or what was your...
I would say that we basically tried to be both parts, like both realistic and magical. And I would say to your first thing is like there were no such words that just like, described the direction for this, the audio vision for this game. It was almost the opposite of like, if you tried to make, one sentence or one kind of like line that just like would, and capture the whole audio direction for this game, you would be looking at it the wrong way, because this game is about variation and you're constantly changing levels and whatnot. So I think that we had to do that practically like every chapter in the game. That was more the like sort of way that we worked. So
clean slate each time.
Exactly. So not.
Did you know that going in advance? Like, did it feel like it was always going to be this super eclectic, series of isolated islands of exploration?
So, I mean, at some point in the beginning, I didn't know, but we kind of quickly found out that, like, okay, so, shareability, like, for example, like, we won't be able to do that whatsoever because every single mechanic is
Meaning
new.
Like universal assets.
Exactly. And the same with music as well. Like, we basically wrote completely new music for each chapter, and even within that chapter, like every sub-level sometimes. So it was...
it feels like that when you play it. It feels pretty bespoke throughout, especially
Exactly.
because there's so many intervening cutscenes and things that break up the constant flow of gameplay in a really organic and flattering way. But I just remember thinking, like some games feel like, you play a game like what would be good, like Red Dead.
Yeah.
And they say, there's like 50 million hours of music in a game like this, and it feels like, but how would there not be? I mean, it's a sprawlingly gigantic world.
Yeah.
This is a game that's sort of deceptive because it doesn't look like it would be just this gargantuan undertaking from that standpoint, but because there's every little isolated corner of it only works in that corner.
Exactly.
You end up, do you remember how much total music shipped in the game?
How much was it? Like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 12 hours or something like that.
My God.
And the game is about 12 hours if you play it like kind of fast. So
that is way, I thought you were going to say half that, and I was going to say, see, for a game like that, for comparison, I had Martian from CD Projekt Red. We did one together on here talking about Cyberpunk and The Witcher and stuff, and I think he said that on Cyberpunk, there was something in the neighborhood of 8 hours of music the game shipped with, but it's like 100+ hours of gameplay.
Exactly.
So the idea of there being potentially more music than that on a game that's a tenth that long.
Yeah. The thing is that if you think about it as a linear film, like basically we wrote music for the film that is like, maybe, if you're a normal player, like, I don't know, 16 hours or something like that. And we wrote those 16 hours of music.
It's just
and
so rare.
Playing.
It's so well produced too. I mean, it really felt like everything was properly recorded and
we had some good talented composers for sure, and they were like extremely fast and delivered like amazing results. So
clearly,
yeah.
So what was the interplay there in terms of, because it's a very well mixed game too. It never feels like the score. Seriously, it's not a platitude because the music is very expressive and very. Full of kind of vibrancy. It really it does the classic kind of film score idea of let's make the scary things scarier and the sort of whimsical things, and like when the sort of flamenco stuff comes in, like it's got a lot of style and verve and it sort of heightens the reality of everything.
Yeah.
But the sound design has sort of a similar task at its hand, and they don't really ever step on each other. So what was your process in even just navigating how to coordinate, who's kind of up at bat and how to step through all that?
Yeah. So I would say, to quote Dr. Hakim, it was a collaboration. It was basically that. Like we had a very well-knitted team, not a big team. We had 2 composers, and the sound team, I think we peaked around like 7 or 8 people. And then we had some external help as well. But we played the game together. We did spotting sessions together, and like feedback was flowing very, very openly and so on. And then so it felt like that was the way to basically tackle like these, each level is basically a new game. So we needed to talk about these things and put the effort in the right place. So we kind of even did, mixing decisions even before we had actually made anything for a certain part of the game. So basically just to not lose hours on music or sound effects or whatever in a place where we didn't want any music, or the music needed to be in a certain way, or the sound effects needed to be in a certain way. We tried to be smart about those decisions early, and okay, but skip the drums in the music here, because we will have a lot of explosions, and it will be bombastic with the sound effects and stuff. And here, all right, screw the sound effects. We can only work with music here. So try to see that, and also then be able to arrange the music and the sound effects with that knowledge already, that okay, so the music won't back us up with these sounds here, and the sound effects won't back up the music in this area, and so on.
Just given the sheer amount of content, also that level of detail is it seems exhausting.
It was, but it was fun as well.
Yeah, I can imagine, really, honestly, both of those, because it is such a sort of joyous game in a certain way. Despite the fact that it has this kind of real heart, I didn't expect. It's one of those that, as much as people were talking about it by the time I started playing it, the fact that it opens with this kind of fractured family as the dynamic straight out of the gate, I thought, wow, this is not sort of childlike fair in that way. It immediately brings this realness, if that's the right word, that I didn't know about. I'd seen so many of my friends talking about it. It already won. It already started getting accolades. I was late to the party, and somehow no one had kind of spoiled. It's hardly a spoiler to say the game starts this way, but still, I was surprised by that. But that's the kind of thing that intrigues me as to how, grounded or not to make it, because there's such real life in the game. Yeah. Something else that I was curious about, that sort of along those lines, is and again, I know this would be sort of necessarily your specific domain, but adjacent to it was the voice acting.
Yeah.
How involved were you? I mean, it sounds like you probably oversaw or directly did the mix, so clearly you're working from that angle. But even just the direction of the actors, it was another one of those things that really surprised me, where I thought, these performances are really on point. And really, never mind the kind of fantastical characters that you meet, but the couple are surprisingly, there's a lot of range. Of course, well-written parts, but where was your role in that aspect?
So I would say first, shout out to Pepe and Annabelle, our two main actors, super talented people.
Where are they based? Are they
in UK?
Yeah, I didn't have a sense of where they're from or that's funny.
Yeah, so they were.
I mean, I guess in her case, but that could easily be put on, so in his case, is he taking that off? Is that?
So Pepe, if I don't remember wrong now, I think he has at least lived in US, and I think he had some parent or something from Mexico. I can't remember exactly how it was now, but he's definitely removing a little bit of that UK accent. But super talented people, and it was so much fun working with them. I wasn't a big part of the direction and so on. As you said, I was mixing stuff and I was editing and helping out with that. But my colleague Greg Stankiewicz, he was our VO designer, and he took a big part in directing the actors as well, both during our internal mocap recordings for the cutscenes together with Joseph, but also then the in-game voices. He took care of that a lot and did a splendid job for sure. So it was it seemed like they just they were on the same frequency. They spoke the right language and just got it to a really high quality level, I would say.
Well, and there's just so much. I mean, that's always the challenge. It's there's a lot of talented folks that could make the world's most perfect 1 minute. Where games start to run into problems is when that expands to 20, 30, 40, 50 hours worth of material that has to somehow stretch and grow. I remember after working on Journey, I remember a friend of mine was like, it's all well and good to score an hour and a half long game, but try was very disparaging. Like, this isn't a real challenge. It's such a focused experience. That's like, try one of these open world kind of, and in a funny way, it's not an invalid comment. It seems like this game, It Takes Two, is almost both. Because it's not a 50-hour game, but there's just so much bespoke content. I didn't really appreciate that until this conversation, just how much one-off. Was that something that was known, even from a budgeting standpoint? Is that something that it was just known in advance? Like, this is gonna just cost a lot. Like, there's just no way around. Or was it like, as you got in, you realized, we really can't reuse any of this stuff? Like, was there any wishful thinking early on that, okay, we'll be able to kind of do some traditional sound design tricks that let us leverage this stuff?
So we definitely wanted to do that, but I think that, a little bit into the production, we just realized that, like, okay, everything needs to be unique. And and that was a good realization, because then we could plan around it. So one of our sort of mindsets for creating all the sounds and the music and the sound effects and the VO for this game was first pass, only pass. We didn't know if we were gonna have time to make it through the game and then go back again to basically polish on our things.
Wow. That's so the opposite of how I tend to work.
Yeah.
I tend to be one of those okay, draft 6. Let's, see what I can do this time. Like, I'll just do it myself, even if I am told, this is fine. Sometimes I think, but maybe it could be better. And obviously it's contingent on having the time to do it. But that's such a different, it's not just pragmatically, but just the way your brain rewires to even, couldn't have been like that at DICE, I would think.
No, definitely not. We had, of course, a lot of iterations there. But I do also like making stuff really polished like the first time, because then I have the interest. It's something new. I'm working on this mechanic, and I have the energy and the positivity to work with that task. If I keep on iterating and iterating and iterating, I will kind of, just not lose the interest, but it will at least be harder than the first time when it's like the first love, so.
But the risk is always, it sounds like you guys didn't have this dynamic, but the risk that can really throw that is that someone like in Joseph's position would come and you spent 10 hours getting this amazing, and it's like, I don't think it's working, and you get that kickback, and that's part of the job. That's perfectly normal, but it sounds like that never really happened.
No, of course it happened. Like in a few instances, we had to go back, or just something changes or something is cut. Or
that was going to be my
whatever.
next question. Is with a game that's so content heavy, there's a real price to pay if this section of a level is removed. Every department, I would think, art department, design, everybody's just had a ton of their hours lost. Did that sometimes that's just how it goes.
But I would say though that we were smart about the same thing as having these spotting sessions with the music and the VO people and the sound effect guys. We also did that with the game. We didn't really put a lot of hours into the game where we thought that things might change. Of course, there were moments where we did make a sound for something that was cut, but I think that in general at Hazelight as well, we tried to really be smart where we put our efforts and of course concept it and proof it, but before we go all everyone starts working on it and making it polished, we actually does it make sense or should we do this? So we ask ourselves those questions before we put too much hours into it.
It's funny how it almost doesn't feel realistic, everything you're saying, because it's so many stories of game development, and particularly games that it's I don't know if it's because as a culture we tend to mythologize the sort of tortured artists. But Journey is a good example where the game came out and it got a lot of attention, and then people started to hear the stories of it was really, really hard for the team internally. There was a lot of of doubt and a lot of just struggle in the typical way that creativity is difficult and is daunting, and it makes you question yourself, and sometimes you'll put an unbelievable amount of time in something, and then you'll take a step back and look at it and go, am I wasting my life? Like what, just it triggers this sort of back to first principles moment of thinking, maybe I should have done a different career. It's like we all have those, well, I should say we all have those moments, but that's where everything you're saying, you have such a kind of cheerful, like, yeah, we planned well and we worked hard and it was awesome. And now it's like award nominated. And I want to kind of push on that a little bit and say, there must have been, it's just impossible that there couldn't have been days of doubt or of thinking, I don't know if this is going to work, or are we behind schedule or something. I mean, because you're describing what sounds like the most perfect situation ever. And my like skepticism is going, that's impossible. It just
You're right. It's impossible. Like I am super positive about what we did.
I'm not trying to dig dirt for the record. I'm not trying to like air dirty laundry. I just like to get the full story because no matter what you are about to say, it has a happy ending. Like the game came out great, and you're obviously like still. You're not like, I'm never talking to those fuckers again. Like you're obviously like it all worked out. So that's why I'm just curious to get the truest possible view of how it all.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
Yeah. So like this first pass, only pass, that was a pain in the ass, like the whole way. So we did do when a year now has passed since we released this project, and you can look back at how we planned it and those sorts of things, we have realized within the audio team especially that we did some really good decisions. But those were, sometimes guesses, sometimes just some sort of intuition. We didn't know what was exactly right or wrong at the time. Now we can see that, like, if we would have done, another way, or if we would have done this way, it would have maybe gone to hell with the whole thing. So we were smart, but this came with a lot of doubts in ourselves, and lots of sleepless nights for me. So like this has not been easy all the time.
Yeah.
But I think that
do you have a family or like kids or anything like that?
No.
That probably helped then, because everyone
does.
I ever talk, I'm the same. I don't have kids, and I consider that to be something that has helped my career. To be bluntly honest about it, because, if I'm facing a crossroad of I got to work till 2 a.m. today, not being a selfish decision, or at least to the degree that it would be if there were a family to interact with, and it's a constant. That balance is a constant struggle for friends of mine that are in that position, and so it sounds like that may we similar, stories, I guess, in that regard. And I do get the sheer amount of content that you have impressed on me that this thing demanded would have made it a grind, regardless of it going well. But it kind of sounds like what you were just saying was that. The fact that it worked out and that your planning sort of ended up being the smart path taken was kind of lucky more than anything else. Like, you make it sound like we had, 5 ways we could approach this. We chose option 2, and in hindsight, the others would have been a disaster, and we didn't know that when we made that. It kind of sounds like what you're saying.
Not really, I would say, though. Like, I, of course, followed my own gut feeling and, my past experience. But I was new in the position of being a lead as well. So, I had never led a whole sound team and a game. But you have to trust in your own, just like kind of thoughts and ideas as well. And I was, of course, constantly supported by our producers and also the rest of the sound team. Like, these were collective decisions as well, not only mine. So I think that, and also one thing that I would really, really like to make clear here as well is, like, I had amazing colleagues. Like, you know, first pass, only pass. It's not easy, as you said, but they managed, and they took these ideas of mine or of that we came up with collectively, and just like worked with that without like, you know, hesitating. And they delivered from time to time, like just like really, really high quality stuff. And we enjoyed this process, but it was not easy for anyone really. We also did a few other things that I like to mention. Actually, is, you know, instead of like if we saw that one of our levels or whatever we were working on, you know, we had some debt, we didn't do stuff fast enough. We had these like focus weeks where we put a few overtime hours in to not build that debt and just save it until the end of the project. We wanted to like basically like collectively with the audio team get together, you know, have a few tasks that were like, okay, but this we can improve on, that we need to do, and you can do that. And we did that together during that week instead of like saving it, and it would become, you know, hundreds of hours in the end. And that was also one of the ways that we basically like took care of these, you know, first pass, only pass issues that arose.
That sounds like this kind of, it's like an anti-crunch technique, basically, to avoid crunch at the end, taking bite-sized parts of that, you know, that debt is a good way to phrase it. The only way that could ever work, though, is if it's pretty immaculately planned and you know how far off you are.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of games struggle with that because it's really difficult to gauge. Like when I do recording sessions, you know, by the time I'm in front of the orchestra, I know all the variables. I know what music has to be done, how long it is down to the second, how many minutes in front of the orchestra I've got, and therefore I can say, like, all right, by, you know, it's we start recording at 10 a.m. By 11 a.m., I know pretty precisely where I need to be. And if I'm a little ahead or a little behind, you know, I can sort of gauge, do I need to be gradually speeding up and speeding down? But that's, so it's like, it's very tightly planned in order to make sure I never end up running out of time or going into overtime or whatever. And also, ideally, not ending with hours and hours of unused time where I could have recorded more music. And like the goal is to use pretty much exactly what's allotted. And so, but that's so easy comparatively because I'm not writing the music somehow in the middle of the session. But that's kind of what game design is. It's instead of 2 days of recording or a week of recording or whatever, it's several years worth where you're just assuming, we're going to encounter all these question marks and we'll figure them out just midstream. Like, you know, it's building the plane in midair as the analogy that is often used, and it's a really good one. I marvel at the team's ability. I mean, what was the secret, I guess, is what I'm asking, of knowing how to plan that accurately enough where you think, okay, we've acquired, I'll make up a number, we've acquired like 5 hours of debt, essentially, that we feel like we're behind. Let's all work a little extra this week so that we're not aggregating 200 hours worth a year from now. Yeah. But you have to have such a clear trajectory. So how did you even know that?
So I would say that it becomes a little bit easier actually with the type of game that we were making, since we were basically focusing on one sort of chunk, like vertical chunk of the game pretty much all the time with the sound production. And we had basically like, you know, this level is this long, we have this many, you know, abilities or mechanics to make, we have this part that doesn't have any ambience or music. And since the game is kind of like chunked up in those different chapters, it actually becomes a little bit more just like you can handle it a little bit more easy than, you know, if it would be a 60-hour game, like an open world thing.
Right.
So I would actually say that was, you know, to our advantage.
So the game's design just inherently. It's not so much that you like the most brilliant planners ever, though you probably are pretty high up on the list. Say. But yeah, it sounds like it's the perfect mixture of was there any big sort of left turns along the way though that disrupted that, where like, you know, a whole big chunk expanded or got dropped, or
Absolutely.
Like, you know, because again, how'd you roll with that kind of thing if this planning is so tightly choreographed? I mean,
so we had, of course, our, you know, things that just popped up out of thin air or things that were removed, but so we constantly increased the size of the audio team during this production, and we had, for example, the mini games and the side content and so on. We just we tried to actually we did tests of like how long does it take to create one of these so say like a low complexity side content task, and I actually clocked the time that it took for us to do that, to be able to calculate how much time it would take and how many of those types of tasks we had in the game. And we got a contractor to help us out with that, because it was basically too much to do for us within the sound team.
So that was the kind of thing, I assume, where you would have to kind of go to your producer or whatever and say, that's just out of our scope, basically.
Yeah. And then, of course, with that help, we could manage maybe the unknowns that came from the sort of, main path of the game and so on. So that was one of the ways. Of course, we in the end did a little bit of overtime, because we were basically constantly in, time debt with the audio team. So we spent some hours for sure, but not a crazy amount either. We tried to, as I said, like do these focus weeks and be smart with that as well, instead of like just piling up those hundreds of hours in the end. But we were all really sort of like we always had the mindset to create the best sounding split screen game ever made in the audio team. Like, even if we didn't have time to maybe do that, but that was our goal, and we never lowered that goal either. Like, that was what we wanted to do, and that was what made sense to us. And I'm super proud of what we made. I cannot say that it's the best sounding split screen game ever made, but we made ourselves proud.
I mean, it's got to be a contender. It raises a very specific question that I'd wanted to ask, and then we kind of wandered away. But one of the things that I think someone from the outside takes for granted, even people within the industry that don't necessarily know how our corner of this works, may not appreciate the intrinsic mixing challenge that comes with a single screen, but two players that are potentially in very different states, and the idea that one can be embroiled in chaos and the other one wandering off on the same screen coming out of the same speakers. It's very different from non-local multiplayer, where you can have really differently managed states, where because I do this a lot in multiplayer games that I've written music for, where if something about the gameplay drives musical adaptivity, and therefore you end up with two players in the same game hearing locally very different things. Yeah, you have none of that. It makes it easier, because you're really scoring a one-player game that's being influenced by something outside in a way. Yeah. What would we could easily spend an hour probably on just this topic,
for sure,
because I imagine this was like the single biggest thing you had to deal with the whole time.
Yeah.
Just how do we reconcile two different characters in different sonic environments, potentially, even if they're super close together? There's a lot of how do you keep that under control, as a general question. And I'm curious if there's any particular story from some moment in the game of like, this moment, proud of that moment.
Yeah. So I would say that one of the at least the things that makes it a little bit easier that you mentioned is that the players are actually quite close to each other, like, all the time. So they are not in like completely different worlds. It can happen, but they follow the same main path, which means that whatever we do with sounds, like, both players are kind of hearing at the same time. But and also that we don't look at it as two different games being played at the same time from a sound perspective. We look at it as a collective mix that is played throughout these speakers, and both players need to hear maybe the sound from one player's screen and the other player's screen.
But it becomes an interesting challenge from feedback perspective, because all those footsteps and shooting like the in the wasp nest, all that are things that the player essentially relies on, as feedback. So, if player on the left is completely overwhelming the spectrum by what they're doing, there must be ways to kind of keep that under control.
So we, of course, we had all the tools that we could possibly create to fix this issue. Like this was, or not issue, but challenge. This challenge was obvious for us on day one that, making a split screen game or sound for a split screen game won't be easy. But we had a few strategies. We started with the first basic one was that, as you said, one player can be in a large room, one player can be outside. How do we deal with the ambiances or the world sounds? So very sort of simple techniques, but for the left player, we lower the ambiances on the right side with 6 dB, and for the opposite, vice versa. And that basically sparked ideas for more things. So we had these randomly generated spot sounds within these worlds or areas as well. And we spawn them on the left side or the right side, or if both players are in the same zone, we play them around both players. And that led to the next step. We realized that but spatialized sounds can become very confusing if they have a lot of information and meaning to them. So normally with the gadgets and weapons like the sap gun and the match gun that you just referred to, we tend to keep them as closely connected to the screen as possible. So a little bit of inspiration from film mixing or cinema mixing, where you keep the main sort of sound in the left, center, and right speaker, and then have the more reverb from the music, ambiances, reverb from the sound effects as well in the surround speaker. So basically keep the sounds connected to the screen as much as we could. And that didn't mean that we didn't have things that were spatialized as well. But if that spatialization didn't bring anything good to the game or to the player, we kept it static. And static.
So it's kind of opting for something that's technically less realistic.
Yeah.
For sake of this.
Exactly. But static in our game doesn't mean static either, because you can have interactable, say a wheel or something that you have to spin as a player, and both players can do it. Then static means that we either play it on the right side or on the left side, depending on which player is interacting with this object. And as you said, maybe going away from something realistic, but instead what we tried to do was to make sure that these sounds always felt really worldized, with the correct reverb, with the baked reflection tails and delay systems, like dynamic delay systems, and make it sound like it really fits or sort of is, believable from the screen, connected to the screen, but believable at the same time, without maybe being panned to the right place.
No, it never comes across that way. That's the thing. It never, because that's a very kind of mechanical solution, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just sort of shove things in directions, and it's like a magician where you can see the card in their sleeve, and it doesn't work. If you see what's being done, it doesn't quite come off. And it never felt like it was solving things through panning as a blunt force kind of approach.
No, you I think we got to a balance where it's really believable, and you feel immersed in this mix, and you really I at least feel like you don't get distracted by the other player. If there is something loud happening on the other side, it's probably quite important for you too at the same time. We also did a lot of dynamic mixing with the Wise HDR system and so on, which means that if both players, for example, are close to an explosion, we duck the ambience volume more than if just one player is close to it. So there was a lot of trickery going on to make this happen. I
specifically noticed that, actually, because there was one point where we were playing in the Wasp level, and my girlfriend was like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And so she just left it sitting there. So I completely coated her in sap, just built up this gigantic mound of it. Because I was curious how the scaling of the sound would work. And I was very impressed that it didn't basically blow up my sound system when she comes back, and I pull the trigger with her controller to blow the whole thing to hell. Because that's often a way to kind of break the sound of a game, where if it's just supposed to be this kind of multiplier on a static sound like that. And because we were in two pretty different, the the origin of the explosion sound would be very different from the 2-player POVs from the way I had set it up.
Yeah.
And it read very naturally. And I remember thinking, and the funny thing is, this was before this conversation was set up, and I had the thought, like, I wonder how they did that. I wonder how they kind of made that feel so natural and not like just a system overload, basically, that would have blown the whole thing into distortion mania.
Yeah.
It's damn impressive. It really, the whole thing is, I feel like the one word that I would pick, I know you said that the MO of it became, there is no summary statement for anything about the game, which I think is cool. I like that idea. That's just sort of eclectic by design. But there's an elegance to the whole game that to me is really, it translates in every element, and it's far beyond the audio. I mean, even visual polish and the performances and the design. It's really. I watched a great. I think it was the Game Maker's Toolkit YouTube walking through a level with someone from the team.
Oh yeah, with Oliver, I think. Yeah.
I didn't remember their name, but it was sort of explaining the design decisions and obviously thinking in terms of the different ways that one would approach designing puzzles if this was single player versus not, split screen versus not, and the whole thing is just approached with a really methodical and creative elegance. It's just the one word I think I'm going to have again and again. And I have two last questions to hit you with here. One is there any one? This is just such a kind of like nerdy question, but is there any? When we were playing in the boss battle against the rusty toolbox, and it kept going and making this very specific noise. We both thought it was so funny that like an hour later, I'm like cooking dinner going, and really, I don't know, it was one of those that just really stuck with me. It was such a hilarious, weird character sound.
Yeah.
Along those lines, is there anything?
I just have to tell you, it's actually our studio manager who makes the voice for that toolbox. Fantastic acting.
I always love those stories when it's like, it's like the accountant who's, the monster or whatever. It's always very funny to me. Is there anything though that you felt like, yes, very professional, very proud of the whole thing. Team did great. Everybody did beautifully. Yes, I accept all that. But is there any one area where you go, that one's like my child, like that? That sound, just any particular, even if it's literally one footstep sound. I'm just curious if there's anything that really.
So I would actually, if I look at the whole game and I'm proud of, as you say, like the whole thing and many different sounds, but I would like to bring forward Anne-Sophie Mongeau. She was the senior sound designer. She created I think pretty much all the sounds almost for this part where you're in the void, you're in the kaleidoscope. And I just think that sounds so cool. And it's so crazy and weird, and you just you get sucked into this kaleidoscope. Things just go haywire.
I remember wondering how some of those were made. Any little trivia?
Synths and stuff. She was being really creative. I am actually not sure how she made all the sounds.
That's the best answer.
But I think that part is just so cool that you come from this playroom and you have flown fidget spinners the minute before, and then all of a sudden you go through this kaleidoscope and we have digital silence in between and this really creative IR convolution reverbs, backward stuff going on, and it's just I love that, and that's Hazelight's crazy spirit coming through. And
no kidding.
Yeah, and Anne-Sophie's talented sound design skills.
Well, that's a great answer. It's better than I would have anticipated. All right, well, my last question is, for the sake of my education, if you could name for me 3 Finnish metal bands that I need to spend some time with, I will do my homework.
Right. So which ones to pick? I would say Children of Bodom is one of the ones that I've listened to the most. Very, very good. I would say that Nightwish is one of the most known, so definitely worth listening to as well. And then for the third, let's see. Maybe a band called Fintroll.
Fintroll?
Yeah, so Finnish troll. I would say that they are also one of the ones that been going at it, releasing albums and super high quality always, and definitely worth a listen.
Amazing. Well, Phil, P-Dog.
Boom.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much.
I know the awards. I actually think I'm giving out the audio award, so I may be bestowing you. I may not. I don't actually know.
I hope we will.
but very, very, very happy that you guys are getting the accolades that you so clearly deserve. I have to say, I was an admirer of it, even only making it. I actually don't really know percentage-wise, but getting a sense from playing the game, this is just skill and artistry on a level that I would never have expected. It's truly excellent. So it's absolutely wonderful that you're getting the kind of clapping from the rest of the folks in the industry for the job well done, and can't wait to see what you do next.
Yeah, it will be crazy. I can tell you that.
Well, ambition doesn't seem to be the problem with this studio. So
no.
Hopefully we don't have to wait too long. I'm sure it'll be years from now. But anyway, congrats again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.